Okay, so after learning about how our cells reproduce, we're now going to learn about how our traits are passed from one generation to the next. So this goes with learning target 30, explain how traits are passed from one generation to the next. There is a link on my website that goes to a little interactive that you guys can go through also after you finish the notes. And this is the interactive that looks like it'll be attached to the video notes. Okay, so remember we were talking about how our cells contain chromosomes? Well, inside those chromosomes are DNA. DNA is the code in the nucleus that stores hereditary material. It stores instructions for making protein. So the DNA is inside the nucleus, inside a chromosome. So we're going to talk about the structure for DNA. The structure is a double helix. So basically it looks like a twisted ladder right here. Okay. Now, the sides of the ladder, right in here, okay, are made up of two chemicals, sugar and phosphate. So the sides of the ladder are made up of sugar, which is called deoxyribose. I forgot to know, that's C5C3. Oh, whoops. Okay, so the sugar is deoxyribose, C5C3O. That's the chemical formula for the sugar. The phosphate is PO4. These are what make up the sides of our ladders for the DNA. Now, the rungs of the ladder are called your nitrogen bases. Okay, right here you can see these are your rungs. Okay, now the rungs are attached to the sugar in the ladder. So wherever these are attached, that's the sugar. Okay, now the rungs of the ladder, the nitrogen bases, there's four: adenine, guanine, cytosine, and thymine. When they pair up in a certain way. If you notice, A and T are always paired up, C and G are always paired up. A real easy way to remember that is AT spells at, so whether it's TA or AT, it'll spell at. And GC, just remember Gilpin County. Okay, the code on the DNA rungs determine the protein that are created and in turn create a gene. So this order of your nitrogen bases, so the G, A, C, A, G, I can't see the other ones, that is the code that will determine what trait you have that's on a gene. Okay, so let's talk about our chromosome. Our chromosome contains DNA and they're located inside the nucleus. So this would be an example of a pair of chromosomes. Remember, we have 23 pairs of chromosomes. Okay, and this is what a pair of chromosomes look like. 23 pairs, 46 chromosomes. Okay, now on those chromosomes, we have inside the chromosomes, we have DNA. And that DNA, these sections that you see, these bands, these are the sections of DNA that code for a gene. That's what these bands represent. They're genes that are a code from DNA. Okay, so again, inside of chromosomes, your DNA, and those sections of DNA will code for a gene, and that's what these bands are. So let's take a look at a gene. A gene is a section on a chromosome that contains the code from DNA to make a protein that controls a trait. So remember I talked about how DNA contains the code for making protein? Well, inside that chromosome, sections of DNA code for a trait. So if you look up here, look on this picture right here, this section of DNA codes for one gene. This section of DNA right here codes for another. So that is what a gene is. It's a section of your chromosome that that contains the codes from DNA to make the protein that controls a trait. And a trait is something like blue eyes, your skin color, your hair color. Okay? Those are examples of traits. Okay, so now we get to our question, well, how do you get those different traits? Well, we have something called an allele. An allele is a different form of a trait a gene may have. You get one allele from each parent to make a trait. So your parents give you 50% of their genes so to you, and you get one from each parent, and that's what's going to code for a trait. Okay, so this could be the female flower, this could be the male flower. This is one allele for the one flower has purple flowers. That's the allele for purple. This is the allele for pink, and you get one for each. I'm sorry, for white. It looks pink. You get one from each parent. These two alleles match up, and that's going to determine your trait. So let's see how that works. Okay, uh, when you get alleles from your parents, the alleles are either dominant or recessive. A dominant allele will show up. It will show up as the trait. A recessive allele will only show up if it's paired with itself. A dominant allele is always represented by an uppercase letter because it's dominant, it's the one that shows up. A recessive allele is always shows up as a lowercase letter. So let's take a look at an example. So this is dad and this is mom. The dads in these diagrams are always squares and moms are always circle. So you get one allele from each parent. So if you look, dad has these two alleles. Mom has these two alleles. Now notice mom got these two alleles from her parents, one from dad, one from her mom. And dad did the same thing. He got one allele from dad, one allele from his mom. So right now, if you look at it, big W, little w, those are two alleles. You've got one dominant, one recessive. Because the dominant uppercase letter shows up, dominant is what you see. Now, W stands for widow's peak. If you have a dominant, you have a widow's peak, which that kind of hides it. Okay, so the widow's peak is kind of it's kind of like a V that comes down on your hairline. That's a widow's peak. Okay, no widow's peak is recessive, so you don't have that V. So let's take a look and see how traits are inherited. Okay, so like I said, you get one allele from each parent. So dad has a widow's peak because he has a big W. Remember, the big letter will always show up. So dad has a widow's peak. Mom does not because she has two recessive alleles. If you have two recessive alleles, that's the only way recessive will show up. So, when you look at their offspring, they can have varieties of widow's peaks and no widow's peak. So dad will either give a big W or a little w. Mom will always give her offspring a little w. Okay, so in this example, the mom will always give the offspring a lowercase w. If you notice, all the offspring have a lowercase w. And then dad's going to determine whether or not they're going to have a widow's peak or not. So dad will either give a big W or a little w. So if you notice, two of the offspring have a big W with a little w, so they have a widow's peak, just like dad. Then the other two offspring are like mom, they have no widow's peak. Okay, so that's how traits are inherited from each parent. Each parent gives one allele that codes for a trait, okay, and that's how traits are passed on.